The morning my office rival collapsed beside my desk, she was clutching a printed resignation letter with my name written across the top in trembling red ink. For 3 years, Blair Whitmore had treated me like the one person standing between her and happiness, but as I caught her before she struck the floor, she looked into my eyes with tears spilling down her face and whispered that none of it had ever been my fault. Then she lost consciousness before she could explain what she meant. Before we continue, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel if you believe kindness can heal old wounds, forgiveness can rebuild broken lives, and even the deepest misunderstandings deserve a second chance. Until that moment, I had believed Blair hated me because we were competing for the same promotion. We worked at a successful architectural design firm in downtown Seattle, where every glass conference room seemed to reflect ambition, pressure, and carefully hidden insecurity. I had joined the company 4 years earlier as a junior project coordinator, while Blair had already earned a reputation as one of the sharpest designers in the office. She was brilliant, disciplined, and impossible to impress. Her presentations were flawless, her deadlines were sacred, and her criticism could silence an entire meeting. The first time we worked together, she corrected one of my calculations in front of 12 people, then slid the marked page across the table without looking at me. I thanked her and fixed the mistake, but something in her expression suggested that my presence offended her far beyond one incorrect measurement. From then on, everything between us became a quiet battle. If I proposed an idea, she found its weakness. If a client praised me, she left the room early. If I stayed late to finish a project, she arrived earlier the next day and completed twice as much. Our coworkers joked that we were competing in a race neither of us had agreed to enter, but the tension never felt funny to me. It felt personal that I tried to understand what I had done. I searched through old emails, replayed early conversations, and even asked coworkers whether I had unknowingly insulted her. No one knew. Blair was polite with everyone else, though never especially warm. With me, she was different. She watched me as if she expected betrayal. She questioned my motives even when I volunteered for unpleasant tasks. Once, when I gave credit to her during a client presentation, she accused me afterward of trying to make myself look generous. Another time, when I covered for her during a sudden absence, she returned and rewrote every page I had completed without a word of thanks. I eventually stopped trying to win her approval. I focused on my work, helped the newer employees, and kept my distance. Still, her hostility affected me more than I admitted. My father had raised me to believe that patience and consistency could soften almost any heart, but Blair's resentment only deepened. By the 3rd year, I no longer felt patient. I felt exhausted. I had begun to resent the way her bitterness followed me into every meeting and turned every achievement into something I had to defend. The day she collapsed began with the announcement that one of us would become the firm's new senior project director. The promotion offered better pay, creative authority, and a path toward partnership. Everyone assumed the final decision would be between Blair and me. Our manager, Conrad Vale, asked us to present separate redevelopment plans for an abandoned waterfront complex. Blair arrived carrying a polished binder, while I brought a digital model and several pages of community research. She avoided looking at me throughout the morning. Her hands shook slightly as she arranged her materials, but I assumed it was nerves. When Conrad postponed the presentations until after lunch, Blair disappeared into an unused conference room. Less than an hour later, she appeared beside my desk with the resignation letter. Her face was pale, and the red writing across the top looked as though it had been pressed into the paper with enough force to tear it. Before I could ask what was happening, her knees buckled. I caught her shoulders, shouted for help, and lowered her carefully to the carpet. As coworkers called emergency services, Blair opened her eyes for only a few seconds. Her expression held none of the anger I had known for years. It held terror, grief, and something even more painful, shame. The hospital confirmed that Blair had suffered a severe panic attack combined with exhaustion and dehydration. She had apparently been surviving on coffee, anxiety medication, and only a few hours of sleep. Because I was the person who arrived with her and because no relative could be reached immediately, the nurse asked me to wait until someone came. I considered leaving. Blair had made it clear for years that she did not want my help, and part of me believed she would be furious to wake and find me there. Yet I stayed. I sat beneath the bright afternoon light pouring through the hospital windows, staring at the resignation letter I had accidentally carried from the office. I knew I should not read it, but my name was written across the top beside 4 words that made my stomach tighten: "He knows what happened." Before I could decide what to do, a woman with short auburn hair rushed into the waiting area. She introduced herself as Blair's roommate, Phoebe Carrington. She looked relieved when she saw me, then suddenly frightened when she noticed the letter in my hand. Phoebe asked whether Blair had spoken before losing consciousness. I told her exactly what Blair had said, and Phoebe closed her eyes as though a secret she had feared for years had finally broken through the surface. She sat beside me and admitted that Blair's hatred had never truly been about the office, the promotion, or anything I had done. It had begun long before we met. 6 years earlier, Blair had been engaged to a young structural engineer named Garrett Cole. They had planned a modest wedding and dreamed of opening a design studio together. According to Phoebe, Garrett had been charming in public but controlling in private. He criticized Blair's appearance, isolated her from friends, and blamed her whenever his own career stalled. Shortly before their wedding, Garrett interviewed for a position at my father's engineering consultancy. My father discovered that Garrett had falsified safety inspection records on a previous project. He reported the evidence, and Garrett lost both the job opportunity and his professional license pending investigation. Instead of accepting responsibility, Garrett told Blair that my father had destroyed him out of jealousy and that our family had bribed witnesses to ruin his future. Blair believed him because she was young, frightened, and deeply attached to the life they had planned. The story grew worse. Garrett disappeared after the investigation, leaving Blair with unpaid debts, a cancelled wedding, and a final message claiming he had been forced to leave because my father had threatened him. Blair never met my father personally, but she memorized our family name. Years later, when I joined the firm, she recognized it immediately. She assumed I had entered the company through the same influence that had supposedly destroyed Garrett. She believed every promotion I earned was purchased, every compliment was arranged, and every act of kindness concealed manipulation. Phoebe had tried many times to convince Blair that Garrett had lied, but Blair refused to examine the evidence. Hatred had become the only structure holding her pain together. If my family was guilty, then Garrett's betrayal was not real. If I was corrupt, then she had not wasted years loving someone who had deceived and abandoned her. Blaming me protected her from a truth she could not bear. That I felt anger rise inside me as Phoebe spoke. Blair had humiliated me, undermined me, and made me question my own worth because she preferred a lie to reality. Yet beneath that anger was an unexpected ache. I remembered the way Blair worked through lunch, how she avoided office celebrations, and how she flinched whenever someone praised her. I had mistaken her harshness for confidence, but it had been armor. Phoebe then revealed why Blair had finally broken. Earlier that morning, Garrett had contacted her for the first time in 6 years. He wanted money. His message admitted that he had invented the threats, lied about my father, and blamed others to avoid prosecution. He had also learned about the senior director position and threatened to send old fabricated accusations to our firm unless Blair paid him. Instead of asking anyone for help, Blair had decided to resign, believing her presence would drag the scandal into the company and destroy my promotion as well. The red words on the letter were not an accusation against me. They were a warning to herself that Garrett knew where she worked and who I was. When Blair woke later that afternoon, the sunlight had shifted across the hospital room, warming the white blanket near her hands. She looked at Phoebe first, then at me. Her face tightened with humiliation. I placed the resignation letter on the chair but did not mention the details Phoebe had shared. Blair tried to apologize, but the words came slowly. She admitted that she had spent years punishing me for a story she had never verified. She confessed that every time I behaved with integrity, she felt more threatened because my decency weakened the lie she depended on. She had resented my patience, my friendships, and even the way my father occasionally sent lunch for our team, because those ordinary acts contradicted the monster Garrett had created. Blair expected me to expose her to the office or demand that she resign. Part of me wanted to tell her exactly how much damage she had caused. I wanted her to understand the anxiety I felt before meetings, the promotions I nearly refused because I feared more accusations, and the evenings I spent wondering whether I was secretly arrogant or dishonest. But as I looked at her exhausted face, I realized punishment would not undo any of it. That I told Blair that forgiveness was not the same as pretending nothing had happened. Trust would not return in one afternoon, and an apology could not erase 3 years of cruelty. She nodded as tears gathered in her eyes. I also told her that Garrett's threats needed to be reported and that resigning would only give him another victory. For the first time since I had known her, Blair did not argue. Phoebe helped us contact an attorney and forward Garrett's messages to the proper investigators. My father provided copies of the original inspection records, witness statements, and correspondence proving that he had followed legal procedures. The evidence was undeniable. Garrett had endangered workers, falsified documents, and manipulated Blair to protect himself. By the end of the afternoon, the story she had believed for 6 years collapsed completely. Watching that truth settle over her was painful. Blair did not look relieved. She looked like someone mourning both the person she had loved and the person she had become while defending him. Blair returned to the office several days later under the clear brightness of a late morning sky. She asked Conrad for permission to speak to the team. Without offering private details, she admitted that personal bias had influenced her treatment of me and that her conduct had been unfair. She did not seek sympathy or excuse herself. She simply accepted responsibility. The office grew uncomfortably quiet. I could see how difficult it was for her to stand before people who had once admired her strength and reveal the weakness beneath it. Conrad postponed the promotion decision and required both of us to complete the waterfront proposal together. At first, I thought the arrangement was impossible. Blair and I had spent years turning every shared task into a contest. Yet the project became the place where something began to change. She stopped rewriting my work without discussion. I stopped interpreting every question as an attack. When she disagreed, she explained why. When I made a mistake, she corrected it privately. When she made one, she admitted it without blaming the pressure around her. Our partnership remained awkward for weeks, but awkwardness was better than hostility. Blair began eating lunch with the team instead of hiding at her desk. She apologized individually to several coworkers she had pushed away. She also started counseling, where she learned how fear had shaped her choices long after the original danger had passed. I learned something too. For years, I had imagined myself as the patient, innocent person in our conflict, but I had quietly allowed resentment to harden inside me. I had begun hoping Blair would fail, even while pretending I wanted peace. Forgiving her required me to face the less generous parts of myself. It did not mean ignoring boundaries. It meant refusing to let her past behavior decide the kind of person I would become. The waterfront presentation took place on a bright spring afternoon. Instead of competing, Blair and I presented one plan. Her design preserved the historic structure while my community research shaped affordable workspaces, a public garden, and training programs for young apprentices. When the clients praised the proposal, Blair openly credited my ideas. I returned the recognition by explaining how her engineering revisions had made the entire project possible. Conrad later offered us separate leadership roles with equal authority, saying the firm needed collaboration more than rivalry. Blair accepted her position but requested that the first major project be managed jointly. She did not ask because we had become best friends or because the past had disappeared. She asked because trust, though fragile, had finally begun to grow. Months later, my father visited the completed first phase of the waterfront site. Blair stood near the entrance, visibly nervous as he approached. She apologized for believing Garrett's accusations and for directing that anger toward me. My father listened quietly, then told her that shame was useful only when it guided a person toward honesty. He said everyone carries some false story longer than they should, but courage begins when we stop protecting the lie. Blair cried in the middle of the sunlit courtyard, not from humiliation this time, but from release. Phoebe stood nearby smiling through her own tears. I realized then that redemption rarely arrives as one dramatic moment. It comes through smaller choices made repeatedly: the choice to tell the truth, to accept responsibility, to remain when running would be easier, and to forgive without abandoning self-respect. Just before the public opening, Blair handed me a small framed photograph of the restored waterfront building. On the back, she had written that I had every reason to become her enemy but had instead given her the chance to become honest. I told her she had done the hardest part herself. She had faced the truth and stayed long enough to rebuild what she had broken. We walked into the courtyard together beneath the clear afternoon sun as families, workers, and local students entered the space we had designed. The building that had once been abandoned now stood open and full of life, much like the friendship neither of us had expected to find. Please leave a meaningful comment about a time when learning the truth changed the way you saw someone, or about whether you believe forgiveness can exist without forgetting the pain. Your experience may give another person the courage to release an old misunderstanding. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Sometimes the person who seems determined to hurt us is fighting a hidden battle we cannot see. We are never required to accept cruelty, but when genuine remorse meets honest accountability, even years of resentment can become the foundation for something better. Blair and I never recovered the years we lost to suspicion, yet we discovered that the future did not have to resemble the past. In the bright courtyard we built together, surrounded by people beginning new chapters of their own, I finally understood that forgiveness is not the act of reopening a closed wound. It is the decision to stop carrying the knife.